Awful river, the front door flush gets in, then the opponent goes ahead and leads out for 250. Ugh, I am absolutely hating this spot.
Hey YouTube.
G'day again everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It's currently a Saturday night in Melbourne and we're going back to the same game we played last Friday night. We ran pretty hot for the most part, except for that time we chopped aces versus kings, but that didn't stick with me, that didn't tilt me at all. But we're going back for revenge against that guy tonight, so let's head over to the game. Let's go.
So I hopped into the game at 7:15 and ended up buying in for 500. It was advertised just as a 1-3 game, but as is often the case in these home games, we've got a few straddle hands in there as well, and even some double and a triple straddle hand. So without any further ado, let's get into these hands. So very first hand of the session, we are playing a 1-3-6-12 with the double straddle, and I'm in the first straddle with ace-8 of spades. I go ahead and raise it up to 35, and then the action's on the second straddle, and they throw in a 3-bet. They go ahead and make it 100. They only start with about 350 in their starting stack, so the option for me is either folding or going all in. Absolutely not going to be calling at this low of an SPR. Ace-8 suited is going to be one of the stronger hands. We're opening in the first straddle. I think it's a fine spot to just go for it, being that we started with less than 30 big blinds effective. So I just go ahead and rip it all in. Then the opponent yells an expletive, then shows ace-4 of clubs and mucks the hands. So pretty nice way to kick this session off. Next hand is a straight 1-3 and a loose aggressive under the gun, opens it up for 10. Then I'm on the button with 9-7 offsuit and I decide to throw in the call. This isn't a good play. Don't try this at home, but whatever the case, we go heads up to a flop of ace-10-5 with 2 diamonds. And the opponent checks it over to me and I'm pretty tempted to go ahead and bluff here, but ultimately decide against it just because I think even though my opponent does have a lot of high card hands in their range, I think they'll probably go ahead and float with them and I need to put in multiple barrels, which would be a fine play, but I would rather do that with some of the hands in my range that have higher equity, like diamonds, backdoor clubs, gut shots, something like that, just because we're going to pick up more equity on certain turns. So I check it back with 9-7 and then we get a free turn, which is the 3 of clubs, putting out backdoor clubs. The opponent checks it over to me again, and at this point I just feel like I'm obliged to bluff at it, try and get my opponent off of a king high, queen high type hand. I go ahead and make it 15, and then the opponent doesn't take too long before throwing in the call. So we get a river, which is the 8 of clubs. We still have pretty much nothing, and when the opponent checks it over to me again, definitely tempted to bluff with only 9 high in terms of showdown value. Plus, I think my opponent will have floated with a lot of gut shots on the turn, queen jack, king jack, etc. So I just think those hands will fold, and I really don't need to bet that big to get them to fold. So I go ahead and bet 25. Then the opponent pretty much snap calls me, which isn't great news. I show my 9 high, and they show king 8 of hearts. So they floated us with king high on the turn and got there with a pair on the river. Probably didn't find the best spot to bluff here, and yeah, it all comes down to the awful pre-flop call. Next hand, we've got the straddle on, and it's because I put it on. So a loose aggressive player opens under the gun to 20, then they get a call from the cutoff and the big blind. Then I look down at ace-queen offsuit, and I think this is a really good spot to go ahead and 3-bet against a loose aggressive players under the gun opening range. If I thought the opponent was a bit tighter and not going as crazy, I definitely will consider just calling here, but we're going to get so many folds when they're opening hands like suited connectors and king 9 suited. So I go ahead and 3-bet it to 120. Then the action's on under the gun. They take maybe 30 seconds or so before announcing, all right, I'm all in. They rip their stack all in for 420, and then the cutoff and the big blind fold. The action gets back to me, and pretty interesting decision whether we want to call off or not. I actually put the ranges in Equilab here, and if you give them a range of hands that is basically all the pocket pairs, 10s plus, and then all the ace kings, and then ace queen suited only, then we're 31% against that range, and being that we're getting 2-1 on a call, we need to be good 33% of the time. So if I do think they are 4-bet ripping it very tight, then it would make sense to go ahead and fold. But when you do give them the occasional bluff / semi-bluff hands like king queen suited, ace-10 suited, and ace-5 suited, we're up to 38% equity, and then it becomes a very clear call. And this is a loose aggressive opponent, and there was some hesitancy for them to go all in, so I definitely think it is at least possible that they're running a bluff here. And once we give them bluffs in their range, it becomes a snap call with ace queen offsuit. So I go ahead and throw in the call, and then the opponent shows pocket queens. Not a great hand for us to be against, but we still do have plenty of outs to improve, and we've got the live run out there for you. So that's a pretty good flop for us. It is 5 high. We do have a gut shot. And the turn, there we go. Ace of hearts, let's go. We move ahead. The opponent has black queen, so they're pretty much drawing to 2 outs, and they don't get there on the ace of diamonds river. We actually trip up. We're going to scoop in a pretty big pot here, dishing out a bad beat. Let's go. Next hand's another straight 1-3, and under the gun player limps, that starts the cutoff, and then I'm on the button with king 8 of clubs, and I actually decide to over limp here. Kind of had this same spot in the previous vlog from this game with king 9 suited, and I think king 8 suited, pretty much the same hand, except it's a little bit weaker, so good spot to over limp when I have position on the button. So I throw in the over limp, then the same loose aggressive opponent from the previous hand with the queens raises it up to 25, and then under the gun actually folds, but the cutoff calls, and then I think I have a pretty easy call getting to play this pot in position. So we go 3 different ways to a flop of king jack 3 with 2 clubs. So let's go. We make top pair plus the second nut flush draw. Small blind C bets for 35. The cutoff folds, and I have a pretty easy just call here. If my opponent is bluffing, I want to enable them to keep bluffing across further streets, and raising here might be a bit of value ownage. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a turn, which is the 5 of spades, putting out backdoor spades. The opponent tanks a little bit before going ahead and betting 70. Now, my thought process for the decision on this straight is pretty much the same as it was on the flop. Really just want to call, let my opponent keep bluffing, and avoiding the cooler when they do have ace king or king queen, king jack, pocket jacks, etc. So I throw in the call, and then we're off to the river, which is the 4 of hearts. So don't get there with our flush draw, but the opponent tanks maybe like 15 seconds before checking. Once they do, I think it's a bit too thin to go for value. I find it hard to find a hand that the opponent would even have this worse, that will want to call a bet here. I think Jack 10 and stuff probably aren't going to double barrel, and they might even fold to the river bet. So then we're just going to get called by hands that were playing a bit of pot control, like King 10 suited, for example. So I go ahead and check it back, and then the opponent shows ace 5 of clubs. So they actually rivered a pair with their 5, but it's going to be no good against our top pair. Beating this opponent in a hand yet again. Let's go. Next hand, we've got the straddle on again, and it's because I put it on again. Under the gun, open limps, and then a loose aggressive cutoff opens it to 20. Then I look down at 4-3 of spades. I decide to throw in the call here. Folding probably is the better play with the limp part left to worry about, and they might potentially limp raise. But if it was heads up, I'd definitely call, so it can't be that much of a mistake. I throw in the call, and then the limper calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop of 8-4 deuce, rainbow with 1 spade. I go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor, as does under the gun. They c-bet 20. I go ahead and throw in the call here. We have showdown value with our pair, and we have backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, front door trip, and 2-pair draw. So I throw in the call, and then under the gun folds. So we get to see the turn, which is the jack of clubs. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent, probably looking at check fold here. Not a great turn for our hand. We do not pick up any more equity, and our opponent's probably going to have a few hands like king jack and ace jack. So I check it over to them, but then they go ahead and bet 25, so we're getting 4.6 to 1 on a call. We only need to win the hand about 18% of the time to throw in the call here, so despite my plan being to check fold, I'm not folding for this good of a price. Even if we are behind a hand like 8x or pocket 10s, we do still have outs to improve, and we're getting a great price to draw to 2-pair or trips, and we do still have showdown value with our pair. So I throw in the call, and then we get to see a river, which is the 8 of spades, pairing what was a flop top pair. I do consider leading out as a bluff to try and get my opponent off of pocket 10s, but then I think it through, and I think that's a really bad idea. If my opponent was bluffing the turn with like queen 10 or ace queen, something like that, like they're just going to fold all those hands, and if we do get hero called by 10s, which I likely think we probably would, we're just value owning ourselves. So I check it over, trying to get to showdown. Then they check back pretty quick and show ace 10 offsuit. So we're going to rake in this pot, and definitely glad we didn't fold on that turn. Next hand, we've got the straddle on, and the double straddle, and the triple straddle. So we're playing a 1, 3, 6, 12, 24 for this hand. Let's go. I'm in the cutoff with ace 9 offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 55, and then the person in the first straddle, who is the self-proclaimed biggest fish in all of Melbourne. His words, not mine. He throws in the call and we go heads up to a flop of ace jack 10 with 2 spades. The opponent checks it over to me and I definitely want to go ahead and bet ace 9 here. If we're going to get value from a worse ace x hand, this is the most likely street that's going to happen. Plus we can get floated by pairs / gut shots. So I go ahead and bet 35. Maybe could use a bigger sizing, maybe not. I go ahead and make it 35 and they throw in the call. So it still heads up to a turn, which is the 5 of clubs. The opponent checks it over to me. And now I think I do start wanting to protect my checking range a bit. I'm going to have a lot of hands that are super strong on this board, like 2 pairs, sets, and the nuts with King Queen offsuit definitely being in my range, and I'm going to want to use a larger bet sizing with those and bet a more polarized range. So that just means I have to take some of my more middling strength hands and check them back to keep that range fairly strong. So I decide to check back, and then we get a free river, which is the 7 of spades completing the front door flush draw, and then the self-proclaimed biggest fish in Melbourne stares me down for a bit before going ahead and betting 40. Against this size bet, folding is absolutely out of the question. We're getting 6.1 to 1 on a call, and we're definitely good more than 14% of the time here, and raising is just way too thin. I'm concerned my opponent has a flush or 2 pair or even a hand like ace queen that could just be blocker betting, and I'm not really looking to bluff them off of those hands either because I think they'll call. So I just throw in the call myself, and the opponent shows queen 2 of clubs. So let's go. We rake in this pot in the triple straddle game. Running hot this session. Next, we've got another straight 1-3, and a loose aggressive opponent opens +1 to 20. The cutoff calls, and then I'm on the button with my second favourite hand in all of poker, pocket kings, raise it up to 80, and then the original raiser folds, but the cutoff calls. So it heads up to a flop of 10-9-4 with 2 spades. You know you're running hot when you've got pocket kings and it's not an ace high board. The action checks to me. I go ahead and c-bet 75, looking to get a lot of value on a wet board here. And then the opponent throws in the call. So it heads up to a turn, which is the ace of spades. I guess my run good's turned around because that is not a good turn. Front door flush gets in and the ace hits. So when the opponent checks it over to me, I think I just want to check back in this spot, really looking to try and get to showdown at this point. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of flushes in their range, and even if they do have a worse hand like jack 10 or pocket 8s, they're probably just going to fold to a continued barrel. I check it back and then we get a free river, which is the 9 of diamonds. The opponent checks it over to me again, and I think on this river in particular, it's just way too thin to continue to bet for value. So I go ahead and check it back. So I show my opponent the pocket kings, and then they show me pocket 5s. So definitely killed our action to see the ace of spades on the turn, but still raking in another fairly large pot for a 1-3 game, so I can't complain. Next hand's another straight 1-3, and I'm in the low jack with ace 5 of hearts. I go ahead and open it up to 10, and then I get a call from the cutoff, and a tight aggressive small blind 3-bets it to 25. The action gets back to me, and I really think the opponent never has an absolutely nutted premium hand when they 3-bet so small out of position, and I do have all of the nutted premium hands in my range, being that I just open pre-flop, so this could potentially be a good spot to 4-bet as a bluff just to try and represent aces, kings, queens, ace king, ace queen suited, when my opponent is very unlikely to have those hands. Having said that though, it may be that they're 3-betting with a more condensed range of hands they really want to see a flop with, stuff like ace jack suited, king queen, pocket 9s, and they're never going to go ahead and fold to a 4-bet, in which case calling would make sense just to see a flop with a hand that's going to play really well, multi-way, and not overplaying our hand by 4-betting if they do call too much. It's a pretty interesting spot. In-game, I did decide to 4-bet. I think, gun to my head, if I had this decision back, calling might just be the better play, just because I think it's pretty likely they won't fold to a 4-bet here. But I went ahead and made 75, and then the cutoff folds and the small blind called. So it heads up to a flop 7-7-4 rainbow with no hearts. The opponent checks it over to me, and there are a lot of boards in 4-bet pots where you just want to have a range bet because you're going to have a super strong hand relative to your opponents. Ace 5 of hearts specifically just has pretty bad equity on this board. It does have some backdoor straights in the overcard with an ace, but I think betting would be an overplay, and I've ranged my opponent on that condensed range of a lot of overcards and pocket pairs, and I think if we bet here and get called, we're probably going to be in a lot of trouble. So I do decide to check it back. Wouldn't hate c-betting though, but we get a free turn, which is the ace of spades. We love seeing that turn. The opponent checks it over to me. Now I definitely want to go ahead and bet for value with my top pair. Let's get called by pocket 9s, pocket 10s. I'll go ahead and make it 40. This is a bit small. I would prefer betting something like 60 just to get more fold equity when I do have a bluffing hand here, like king queen suited or something. But I made it 40, and then the small blind calls pretty quickly. So it still heads up to a river, which is the queen of diamonds, and then the opponent goes ahead and leads out 155. Pretty gross spot here with a weak ace X. I definitely think it's very likely my opponent has all of the offsuit ace queen combinations in their range, like ace 10 suited, ace jack suited. Then I try to think of what are some potential bluffs they could have that floated on the turn. Well, there was backdoor spades on the turn, so I guess something like jack 10 of spades makes sense. I don't think they're ever going to like block a bet a queen X hand, like queen X of spades to this sizing in particular. I think those hands might block a bet to like 80 or 100. So it's a pretty interesting spot. We do have one of the strong hands we're going to have in our range. I think a lot of my ace king and ace queen combinations are going to bet a flop. So yeah, pretty confusing spot. Can't think of many bluffs my opponents have. So I guess folding as an exploit does make sense, but we're pretty high up in our range. We're getting 2.6 to 1 on a call. Are we good 80% of the time here? I'm not really sure, but I don't want to go ahead and fold one of the strong hands in my range and then have my opponent showing me that they turned pocket tens into a bluff or something. So I did throw in the call, and then the opponent shows pocket sevens. So they actually flopped quads. Wow. Yeah, I like I said, I couldn't think of many bluffs that I put them on, but definitely didn't suspect that they even had trips, let alone quads. GG to the villain. Next hand, the straddle's on, and the same opponent from the previous hand opens under the gun for 25. Then I'm in the cutoff with king queen of hearts. I go ahead and 3-bet it to 75, and then under the gun calls. So it heads up to a flop, and it's a banger flop. It is king queen 7 with 2 clubs, and under the gun actually goes ahead and leads out for 120. Action's on me, and this is already a pretty interesting spot. I think my opponent's range, when they do lead out here, it's going to have a lot of stuff like even ace-king offsuit. I think they might potentially lead out here, not wanting to 4-bet that in an early position for late position dynamic. So I can absolutely get value from that hand with a raise. Plus they have a few flush draws, open-ended straight draws I can get value from as well. So there's a lot of incentive for me to raise on this board. But one of the reasons I really like calling instead of raising here is it keeps my call down range super strong. But I have a lot of hands in my range that are ace king and pocket aces, even some ace queen as well, which I'm probably going to want to continue with on this board. And the problem with those hands are they're pretty vulnerable on a lot of different runouts, basically anything where the straight gets there or the flush gets there. And also they're going to be worried about king queen and pocket sevens, maybe even like king 7 suited themselves as well. So it's just nice to have a super strong hand I can actually call down with, just to make sure I'm not overfolding if I do decide to lay down ace king, because I think my opponent's betting a pretty tight range of hands. So I do decide to throw in the call here, but I'm definitely open to the idea that I might be overthinking it and I should just give in to all the incentive I have to raise on this board. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you think of this decision. I do think it's very interesting. Regardless, we're off to the turn, which is the 8 of hearts. So pretty good turn for us. The flush doesn't get in, the straight doesn't get in, and the opponent tanks a little bit before checking it over to me. Now, I think I have a pretty clear decision to go ahead and bet. Like I explained, my opponent's going to have a lot of ace-king in their range, as well as flush draws, straight draws, and I just really want to go ahead and get value from those hands. I go ahead and bet 200. Not super in love with this sizing. I think I could bet something closer to like 300 and still get called by a lot of the same hands. So giving up a bit of EV with a smaller sizing here. But I went ahead and made it 200, and then the opponent takes a little bit before throwing in the call. So we're off to the river, which is the 8 of clubs. Awful river, the front door flush gets in. Then the opponent goes ahead and leads out for 250. Ugh. I am absolutely hating this spot. Whilst I said on the flop that I think it's very possible my opponent could have a hand like ace-king, I actually think that hand's probably never going to lead out on this river. Like, that hand will be absolutely scared of the flush draw. I really think that their range is comprised mostly of all of the ace-x of club combinations, like ace-jack, ace-10, ace-2, ace-3, all of clubs are in their range, absolutely, I think, as well as jack-10 of clubs, maybe even like jack-9 of clubs, 10-9 of clubs. All of these hands make all the sense in the world. When I think about what other hands my opponents are leading out, we already covered, I don't think it's ace-king. I also don't think it's like king-queen either. I think if that hand led on the flop, that would just keep betting out on the turn. Like, why would it stop, play check call on the turn? That doesn't make sense. It makes more sense with flush draws, and I think my opponent has a flush here like 100% of the time. So even though I'm getting 4.2 to 1 on a call, I think I'm nowhere near good 19% of the time here. So I make what was a pretty controversial decision when I put it up on Instagram, but I actually did decide to fold my king queen here. I think maybe like 80% of the people said that they would call when I put this up on Instagram. So definitely going against the grain with this one. But like I said, I think my opponent has a flush and they're playing it face up, and I'm actually still happy with this fold, even though I've got a lot of negative feedback for it. The opponent mucks their hands pretty quickly and did look a bit annoyed when they mucked their hands. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt because I'm not the best at live tells, but I did think they really wanted a call, and I'm super stoked to lay this hand down, even if a lot of you are going to roast me for it. So we got one final hand before we wrap this thing up, and boy, is it a doozy. So we're just playing regular 1-3 under the gun limps as does the cutoff. Then I'm on the button with ace-3 of clubs. I decided to over-limp here. We've been doing it a lot recently on the vlog, and particularly in position when we're on the button, I think ace-3 suited is a great hand to have in that range because it's one of the stronger hands we can limp call with, and it plays great multi-way. So I throw in the call, and then the loose aggressive player we got earlier with the ace-queen goes ahead and raises it up to 25. And then a loose aggressive big blind throws in the call, and under the gun actually folds, but the cutoff calls. And when the action's back on me, you already know, I throw in the call. So we're 4 different ways to a flop of king 8 deuce with 2 clubs. So we flop the nut flush draw. It's a pretty nice feeling. The small blind goes ahead and c-bets 40. The big blind throws in the call, the cutoff folds, the action's back on me, and I do consider raising here, closing the action, try to represent a 2 pair or pocket 2s, maybe even pocket 8s I've limp call with sometimes, but I think calling's probably the better play, more likely to flush over flush someone. If we just call, someone gets there on the turn, they're very likely to keep betting or start betting if they're the big blind, so I throw in the call. Wouldn't hate raising either though, so we get to see a turn which is the 4 of spades, bang a turn for us, we turn a gut shot in addition to our nut flush draw, and then the small blind goes ahead and bets 155, then the action's on the big blind, and they're in the tank fairly decent time before raising it up to 400. So the action's on me now, and this is honestly a very, very awkward spot. We've only got 790 behind in our effective stack, so we're not getting great implied odds to draw to a flush. Additionally, we don't have like much left that we can semi-bluff with. I think with all of that in mind and the fact we're not getting direct odds to draw to our flush or straight, folding probably is the best play. As much as it sucks with a hand that has this much equity, folding probably the correct play in the long run. It's not what I did though. I went ahead and ripped my stack all in. I really thought that it was pretty likely as a loose aggressive opponent that the big blind was semi-bluffing with a hand like 7-6 of clubs. They might call off with that, so we're getting a bit of value with that. Bit dicey though if they do have 2 pair or a set, which they have a lot of. They definitely have all the pocket 8s, all the pocket 2s, all the king 2 suited, king 8 suited. So yeah, I just think we're going to get called off a lot by 2 pair when we do this, and it's much less likely we get called off with a flush draw. Even if we get called off with an 8 high flush draw, which is a pair and a flush draw, like we're not in great shape. So yeah, not really in love with my play here with the shove. Whatever the case, I went with it here with my combo draw. And then the action's on the small blind and they start tanking. And they're in the tank probably a good like minute or so before mucking their hand. Then the action's on the big blind. Now they start hitting the tank. And they're in there probably a good 2 minutes themselves. And I'm thinking, well, great, they must have a worse flush draw. Like surely if they had any hand better than ace high getting this price, they're going to snap off. So I'm actually kind of wanting a call at this point, wanting to get called by like 7 high flush draw or something. They're in the tank for a while before exhaling and throwing their chips in for the call. We show our combo draw and then they show ace king offsuit. I was not expecting to see that hand at all. The small blind pounds the table and he announces that he have pocket aces, which I totally believe. The opponent insists on running at one time, which is totally fine by me. And then the river, 5 of hearts, let's go. We make straight on the river and we bear beat the opponent's ace king in this massive pot for a 1-3 game. Over 650 big blind pot. Holy crap, absolutely running hot to get there on the river. Even though I really do think I misplayed the turn. I did get there by luck boxing it. Didn't really play this one right in my opinion. Those were the most interesting hands I played across this session. In terms of how I feel about my play, my gameplay grade, I'm going to give myself a C plus today. Largely, I was fairly disappointed with a lot of the decisions I made this session. I think ripping it with the ace-3 of clubs is a pretty colossal error for like over 200 big blinds in a 1-3 game. And I mean, I got lucky and I ran good to get there, but I would just be absolutely in the gutter in terms of how I feel about my performance if I didn't get there. So really can't be giving into confirmation bias and winning bias. That is a bad play, and I have to downgrade myself for it for sure. A few other bad plays, calling pre-flop with 9-7 offsuit, and numerous bet sizing mistakes, including the king-queen suited hand, but got to lift myself up a bit. I really did like folding the river with the king-queen suited, even though I know the comments going to roast me for it. I just think the opponent always has a flush there with the line that they took. So definitely some good plays mixed in there with the bad, but yeah, definitely a downgrade from how I have been playing in previous vlogs. I've been really in the zone and really putting out good performances, a lot of A grades, a lot of B grades, and this is a downfall, unfortunately. Hopefully it's not a sustained thing, and it's just because I was tired this session, which I honestly was, and I just got to get more rested before I go and play poker, and then hopefully I'll be able to get back to those A's and B's instead of today's C+.
Okay, so it's about 3:45 a.m. and we're in the parking lot of the fine establishment we played poker in this evening. Ended up playing a total of 8.5 hours on the session, and I'm glad I put in the volume because I ended up buying into the game for 1,000 and cashing out for 1,650. Definitely lucky that we ran good in that all-in pot because that's where the majority of the winnings definitely came from. But I'll take a win however I can get it. That's going to wrap up the vlog for today. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end. That really does help my channel's analytics, and I do appreciate it. If you haven't already, hop in the comments below and leave your thoughts on the individual hand histories I played. Me right now, I'm going to go home and get some sleep. It's very early in the morning and I've got another home game tomorrow, so keen to get a rest before I go to that. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.